We're getting ready while I'm just going to be sharing the page right now so that those who are watching us on the other streams can participate. I will just share, it was sort of Rosh Hashanah yesterday, Rosh Chodesh. And Rosh Chodesh, for us, we have, Rosh Chodesh is the head of the month, but like the head which contains the brain, our central nervous system, it's a new beginning and a fresh beginning. In fact, it's the first Jewish month of the year. So yes, Nisan is the first month we were commanded to our accountability for time. So this is a very important time that we should all connect with and it's the new astrological sign of Aries. It's the month when we experience redemption. So I think we should all tap into and tune into the new reality. Just a moment, ladies and gents, we'll be ready. Just a second. There's a lot to connect with the new month of Nisan. And it's a month of miracles, it's a month of healing, and we could all use healing in our lives. We could all use more miracles in our lives. We could all use more blessing in our lives. So I encourage everyone to tap into the new energy of the month of Nisan, celebrate, and really, really connect with it. We start a new Parsha this week. We're reading the Parsha of Vayikra. And let's just quickly look at a few aspects of the Parsha of Vayikra, and then perhaps we'll have some time to look at some insights on it and connect it with the festival that's coming up, Pesach. Vayikra begins the third book of the Torah. We concluded Shemos on Shabbos. We ended with the words Chazak, Chazak, V'nis Chazek. We gave each other the strength, the encouragement to keep going. We remember the past, we live the present, we trust the future. As my mother of blessed memory used to tell me, yesterday is history, tomorrow's a mystery. But today is a gift of God, and that's why it's called the present. So carpe diem, we have to seize the moment that we're in. Let's make the most of it, of every single moment, how precious and important it is. And the book of Vayikra now takes us into the service that was conducted in the tabernacle and the Mishkan that was built by the Jewish people for God. Some people ask the question, when the Torah describes the creation of the world, we are given the narrative of the entire universe creation by God, 6 days in 31 verses. 31st verse, Vayechu hashamayim v'haaretz v'chol tzevam. Verse 31 is the conclusion of creation. Yet this vast universe that we haven't even scratched the surface of comprehending, of understanding, of appreciating what this world entails, what it contains. You think about all this scientists and archaeologists and sociologists and every other researcher out there, and yet of all that, we have 31 verses to describe the creation of the whole world. We have yet to scratch the surface of comprehending this universe. And that's it. The Torah is terse. The Torah is short in describing the world's creation. Contrast that with the Mishkan, the tabernacle the Jews built in the desert. Here we have, how many parshas have we been reading about it? Since the end of Mishpatim, Teruma, Tetzaveh, lots of Kisisa, Vayakel Pekude, 6 portions. That's how many chapters? How many verses? And then go on now to Vayikra, where we're describing the service that was conducted within the temple. So we have a description of all of the details of what went on there, of the various sacrifices, the animal, the fowl, the meal offerings, everything that was offered by the priests in the newly constructed tabernacle. And perhaps one answer to explain this, and I always love sharing the story of Henry Kissinger to describe it, but the short of it is, for God to create this world is no big deal, and that's why the Torah is very quick and very terse, very short about this description. But for you and I to create a home for God, that's revolutionary, that is marvelous, that is amazing. Each of us has our task to achieve, to do in this world. And we have to realize our purpose here. So let's just look through the parsha very briefly, very quickly. I'm using a chumash because my phone is occupied, very well stationed here on my computer, which I'm not using today, to just quickly run through the parsha. We start off with Vayikra. Literally, the word Vayikra means God called out. Vayikra Hashem al Moshe, God called out to Moshe. And just the word Vayikra, some people like languages and appreciating and understanding the etymology, the source, the roots of languages. Vayikra could perhaps be related to the word in Latin vocare. Vocare means a calling, and Vayikra means God called. This is God's calling to Moshe. Moshe's calling, his purpose to serve as the leader of the Jewish people, and perhaps applying it to ourselves. We have to ask ourselves, what's my calling? What's my purpose? What's my mission? What am I here for? When we look at the month of Nisan that just started, and the new astrological sign of Aries that we have just welcomed yesterday, Saturday night's new moon, and to realize it's the astrological sign, the horoscope is that of the ram, and that talks about the ram, sheep, or herd animals. Perhaps there's a message to us about herd immunity that we need to achieve in order to bring healing to the world from this dreadful coronavirus disease. Every day, this morning I was at a Shiva home hearing of another person lost their life to COVID. It's not over. Even though indeed I'm lucky to have had my jab, still have my, still have the marks right over here from it, where I put on my tefillin, got this bandage. But the vaccine is only going to protect us if we're all careful, if we're all doing and playing our part, playing our role. And it's very important that we are considerate and caring and sensitive and following the rules. It's not over yet. And I know some other people in this shir joining us from overseas, from Israel, who were lucky to get their inoculation already. But until each of us, until we achieve that herd immunity, we're in this boat together. And we all have to do what we can to keep careful. So when we talk about the sacrifice in the Parsha, and it's an important message to all of us, yes, sacrificing a little bit of comfort, wearing this shmata over our faces and keeping the social distancing still, it's all part of the calling that we all have right now. And every day in life, we have to look, what's our calling? Yes, it might be a little bit of sacrifice for the well-being of others, which in turn is the well-being of ourselves as well. So the first aliyah indeed talks about some of the sacrifices. In fact, I could say this whole book of Vayikra is going to talk about sacrifice, but we're talking very specifically discusses the laws of the cattle, the sheep, the korban olah. Olah means to go up. So ultimately, when we are offering a sacrifice, we're elevating ourselves by sacrificing for God, by sacrificing for another. We're elevating ourselves. We're recommitting our connection to those around us, especially to the Almighty. Parsha then continues and tells us, God teaches Moshe the laws of the korban olah, and continues with the description of 3 types of voluntary meal offerings. There was unbaked flour, there were the baked loaves of bread that one would bring, and there was the shallow fried meal offering. All voluntary meal offerings also contained olive oil and frankincense. Of course, I think the significance of that and messages that we can learn from it about the application in our lives, that when you're doing a meal offering, when you're making a sacrifice for God or for your fellow human being, whether it's for your spouse or children, for whomever you're making that sacrifice, make it rich. Obviously, it's different levels. Sometimes we do it involuntary. Sometimes we do it voluntarily. Sometimes we put our heart and soul into it. Other times not. And the Torah describes the volunteer offerings. And it goes on to tell us about what they contain. In fact, we read here about the Omer offering. I'm not going to talk too much about the Omer now because that started on the second day of Pesach. So we have 2 weeks. In fact, today, in 2 weeks, will be the second day of Pesach, right? And God instructs the Jews to add salt to every animal sacrifice or meal offering, which is a symbol of our everlasting covenant with God. We know that salt is a preservative, right? So the symbolism of salt is to preserve. And I think in life as well, every time we eat bread, especially at our Shabbos, when we went to dip the bread into salt, we want to preserve this moment that we're living in. We're having a beautiful Shabbos meal with our friends, which reminds me of a very significant message about the Pesach. Oftentimes we get caught up Pesach with all the significance of Pesach, and this, it's very important, and we could spend all our time now talking about Pesach and the symbolism and discussing Vertlach and insights and ideas and all the profound meaning of Pesach. But we also should enjoy Pesach, enjoy the moment of Pesach, preserve that moment. If we're celebrating with our children, whether in person or not, that it should be enjoyable, that it shouldn't be a upkamenish. It shouldn't be an experience that's dreadful, that people detest, that they hate. Let's make it an enjoyable experience. My father used to say about the Seder, it says, Kol hamar b'lesaper b'tzias Mitzrayim harei b'zeh meshubach, which literally means whoever increases lesaper to tell the story of our exodus from Egypt is praiseworthy. So my father made a little play on the words. Kol hamar b'lesaper. Marba could mean increase. It could also mean to hurry, right? So kol marba, whoever increases or hurries, lesaper, to the dinner. Lesaper, right? In Hebrew it means to tell the story. In English it can mean lesaper. Remember, if there's small kids around, or if there are people who are hungry, then why not talk over dinner? Let's not farschlep and delay and extend all the talking and analysis and everybody's profound ideas. And I'm talking to myself. I'm looking into my phone right now and talking to myself. Okay, remember, if you ever want to hold it against me, you could show me this YouTube video later, because now it's all preserved for posterity, where all our shiurim are posted on YouTube and Facebook. You could always remind me. This is what I say. We put salt in the sacrifice to preserve it. We want it to preserve the moment. The way to preserve the moment is to make it enjoyable. That our children and all our guests, whoever's around with us, I know it's COVID still, so it's still going to be a challenge, but that we should all enjoy the moments together to preserve them. Even if you're doing your Seder in quarantine for any reason by yourself, make it enjoyable. Don't just go to sleep. Don't just rush through. Make it something that you'll appreciate. And if you're doing it with others, make sure they'll appreciate, so that the moment is memorable, that it's preserved, that it's something you can say, this was a geschmacke moment. We had to enjoy and celebrate our Pesach together. And in fact, we're told about the Korban Omer, that we're commanded not to include any leavened items or anything which contains honey. We'll talk more about that perhaps. Leaven, chametz, no chametz on Pesach. Chametz symbolizes ego. Bread, what's the difference between bread and matzah? Bread rises, it's inflated. Matzah, on the other hand, is flat. And this teaches us the significance of humility. Oftentimes, we're talking about sacrifices, right? How many people do we know who get sacrificed on by ego? I am serious. How often is it, sadly, that people are sacrificed by ego? It happens, right? The concept of sacrifice, which is the theme of this week's Parsha of Vayikra, and in fact, the entire book talks about sacrifices. Sacrifices depends what sacrifice it is. It could be beneficial for those around us. It could also be very dangerous. In the name of sacrifice, the worst abuses and bloodshed occurred throughout history. Suicide bombers are willing to sacrifice themselves for their cause, for the sake of whatever it might be, for the fatherland, for the religion. How many people were murdered in the name of sacrifice? How many people were maimed, were abused? We have to be careful with what sacrifice is. Sacrificing is something that the Torah talks about. We sacrifice our animals. Today we sacrifice our animal soul. It means our own selfishness, our own desires. Instead, we should have, the Torah is telling us to have matzah. Matzah is about humility. We should be willing to sacrifice those elements within ourselves. instances that I'm familiar with, where for the sake of protecting an institution or protecting a family, criminal molesters are kept under cover, so to protect the reputation. Yeah, I'm intimately familiar with a particular case, and it's happened time and time again. So like anything in life, money is good. Money can do so much good and kindness. Money can be destructive. Our phones, our devices are so good. We can learn so much Torah. We're doing that right now. It can be self-destructive as well if we become addicted to it. And the same thing, we could think of sacrifice. How much sacrifice is beneficial and good? You want to cultivate a relationship with somebody, you need that sacrifice. But how many battered women whose husbands are behaving despicably are sacrificed on the altar of maintaining the dignity, the status of this man? In some organizations and movements, individuals are stepped on, are crushed, and their best friends remain silent and sacrifice their own kin on the altar of not messing with the system. We talk about egos. Children are sometimes sacrificed on the altar of the ego of their parents. And again, talking to myself, we need that humility. We need to be like the matzah. Pesach is coming. Let's take the message of the matzah. The matzah is flat. The words chametz and matzah are so similar to each other. They both have a mem. They both have a tzaddik, right? Chametz. The only difference is the chametz has a ches, which is closed on the top. There's no way for the ear to escape. The matzah has a hey at the end. The chametz, the ego, is always putting itself first. It's narcissistic. It's self-centered. The Torah portion this week, Vayikra, is talking to us that we're not allowed to have leaven in the Korban Omer. What is the Omer to us? Starting in 2 weeks' time, Sunday night, that means 2 weeks from last night, we start counting the Omer. We work on a process of self-development, of self-refinement. We're getting closer to Shavuos. We're counting down 7 weeks. That means in 9 weeks from today will be my birthday. 9 weeks from today will be the birthday of the Jewish people in a sense, because it's the time we receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. So we start counting. We start counting on Pesach. We learn the count has to start with humility. It starts off on a time where there's no chametz. Yes, by the time Shavuos comes, you can have a healthy ego because you've worked on your own self-refinement. In order to refine ourselves, we have to know not to allow that ego to get in the way. So how do we distinguish between a sacrifice to God or sacrificing for our family, a good type of sacrifice, and a detrimental, a negative type of sacrifice that we should not possess? How do we determine the difference between a sacrifice that's noble, that's moral, and a sacrifice that's foolish and destructive, as there are so many? Between a sacrifice to the true God, to Hashem, or to pagan false idols. And yes, today, idols include money. How much have people said they're doing it for the children's sake? They're going to spend more time in the office. They're going to do it to make more money. But what good did that do? I think of my own childhood and think of some of my friends who perhaps I was envious and jealous of because they had more money. And I see, unfortunately, where that money led to, whether it was drugs or alcohol, destructive behaviors. And to think, my family did not have a lot of money. We weren't wealthy. We weren't affluent. But as my parents would say, the rich with nachas, the rich with a family of children. It's hindsight that's 2020. And we have to train our children, our family, our grandchildren, ourselves about the priorities in life, about what's really important. Whether you're wearing a $3 watch or a $30 watch or a $300 watch or a $3,000 watch. I'm paraphrasing the words of Steve Jobs, founder of Apple. You ever watched the video or read his essay he wrote in the hospital in his final days. They all tell the same time. Whether you're driving a cheap car or an expensive car, they both get you to your destination. We have to know what's important, what's a priority, what sacrifices are important. And so when I look at the Parsha this week, and I'm looking here, I think perhaps one answer to this critical question we can see in the Parsha this week. Always, the Alter Rebbe would tell us you have to live with the times. What does it mean to live with the times? To live with the Parsha. And considering we're just before Pesach, so we're making a synthesis, a combination of both. And one of the verses that have just popped into my sight that we have in our Parsha tells us right here, all meal offerings brought before Hashem should not be prepared leavened, should not have chametz, for any yeast or honey shall not be used in your offerings to God. What does this mean? What is the Torah telling us here that we can't have chametz? First thing is, get rid of that ego. Let's eliminate, let's get the ego out of the way. Many offerings in the sanctuary, in the Mishkan, and later on in the temple, in the Beis HaMikdash, were brought from flour that was kneaded with oil, as the Torah even describes here. But the Torah says you cannot use any yeast to inflate the dough or any honey to sweeten it. You have to use only pure flour without any foreign ingredients. Nothing. But then, let's just look at this. I'm looking at my Chumash here, 2nd chapter of Vayikra. 2 verses later, the Torah states that there needed to be an additive that accompanies every single offering. And what is it? I told it to you a minute ago. Salt. Salt. There was not a single sacrifice in the Beis HaMikdash, whether it was animals or grains, that was unaccompanied with salt. And that's why to this very day, we include salt on our table. We dip the challah, the bread, into the salt. And the obvious question is, why here are we saying you should preserve it with salt, you're enriching it, so to say, yet yeast and honey were absolutely forbidden to be added, and salt was absolutely required? Every single offering. What's the difference? And for this, we have to understand the difference between the leavening agent and the sweetening of honey, which are forbidden, while salt is required in every offering. Now, all extraneous elements are forbidden in offerings. The Torah is saying we don't want anything interfering. The recipe for an offering to God has to be organic, pristine, original. You're forbidden to use any ingredient that would alter the natural state of the food, whether it is yeast that's going to make it rise or honey that's going to sweeten and change the taste. But salt is different, because salt brings out the taste which pre-exists in the flour or the animal. Salt doesn't alter, but rather it enhances the natural state that already exists in the food. Now, some people even sprinkle salt onto slices of watermelon. They even sell watermelon and salt flavored Kit Kats in Japan. Why ruin the watermelon with salt? And the answer is that salt actually brings out the sweetness. It's fascinating. When we salt our food, we're not adding an extraneous external taste, we're enhancing the pre-existing taste, the pre-existing flavor. You see, our tongue has specific buds for salt. I wonder if coronavirus has an effect on it, because many people have said that the coronavirus caused them to lose their sense of taste. Thankfully, I didn't get corona, I hope not to, so I can't answer that. But it's an interesting question. I was just sitting with somebody this morning who had corona, said he still hasn't overcome that lack of taste. But whenever salt is present in food, yes, someone wanted to comment?
May I ask a question, please?
Sure, yes, go ahead.
It's something to do possibly with that salt does not or did not have to be tithed?
Good question. I'm not sure if it's necessarily related, because your animals, you had to tithe from your animals, yet the animals were offered as sacrifices. So I'm not sure, but it could be that there's an aspect to that. Did you want to elaborate on that?
No, it just struck me that all other produce had to take Matzah and Truma and tithe,
right?
But salt,
not salt. Yeah, right. I'm not sure if there's a correlation or not, but it's an interesting point. I'll look into that. Thank you for that,
Rabbi.
Thank you. But if we look from a very basic perspective, whenever salt is present in food, it actually opens up the taste buds. And our body requires a certain amount of salt actually to function correctly. Now, on the one hand, salt is good because we use it for electrolytes, for brain function, for our nervous system, many other functions. Our sweating is related to how much salt it is in our circulatory system. But at the same time, too much salt is no good. It can cause cholesterol problems and other issues, high blood pressure. So you got to be careful with it. But with salt causing the taste buds in our mouth to open, we're able to taste the food a lot better. And that's why, in moderation, the right amount of salt that you use in your cooking is essential. It's very important. The salt actually brings out and enhances the flavor of the food. That's why in Japan, it's common that they put salt on the watermelon. It actually makes the watermelon sweeter by opening up taste buds, which allow it to catch the sweetness. Now, this is something very interesting that the Torah is telling us. How we're able to distinguish between noble and not so noble, abusive sacrifices. What's the right type of sacrifice we should have in our lives? I had a rabbi used to remind me always before Pesach, when I was in Kollel. So what was it? Maybe for 2 years after we got married. And he used to announce before Pesach, remember that dust is not chametz. And remember that the children are not the korban Pesach. I wasn't sure what he meant back then, but now that I got my own kids, I understand it very well. So you have to look at the ingredients which come with the sacrifice. If they include yeast, what's yeast? Inflation, ego, stay away. Stay far away from such a sacrifice. If it includes honey, an interference in the actual flavor, the original, making it artificial, keep away, keep your distance. If it includes salt, which will bring out the taste of it, which will preserve it, that's the sacrifice you want to embrace, you want to include, you want to offer. The sacrifices which come with yeast and honey represent sacrifices that change who we are, that turn us into unnatural humans, that distance us from our true selves. Just as yeast and honey alter the natural state of the taste of the dough, it inflates it. It's egocentric. And the ego, as much as you think ego looks like we're making ourselves bigger, ego really makes us smaller, makes us duller. The bully, the kid is the bully in school, always we know has their own issues that they have to deal with. Ego is one interference, and the honey is symbolizing an alteration of the taste, which perhaps represents the idea of stifling our imagination, our intelligence, creativity, the courage of dignity and happiness. They turn us into lifeless robots, depriving us of our inner richness and majesty that each one of us has. They demand from us to think less, to listen less. Remember, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. We're meant to listen more than we speak. Our mouth even has all these safeguards, lips and teeth, that we should be careful with the words we speak. Listen more. Those sacrifices that interfere with our natural state, with who we really are, the ego, the honey. But of course, there are sacrifices which come with salt, symbolizing the fact that these sacrifices, they may challenge us heavily, but ultimately they allow us to become who we really are. That's what we want to preserve. Just like salt opens up our taste buds and allows us to experience life in a far deeper and a richer way. It brings out that inner light in us, that we could emerge our inner depth within our souls. That's the type of sacrifice we want. These are sacrifices which make us more creative, more complete. They never demand of us to dull our minds, to stifle our curiosity and repress our inquisitiveness. Rather, it challenges us to focus our energies, to harness our creativity like laser beams as they focus the direction, the potency. They enrich us, they enrich our spirits, they broaden our horizons, they expand our consciousness. And so this is two types of personalities that we might have within ourselves that we have to work on. There's the aspect of yeast and honey, which is artificial superficiality, and salt. Again, sometimes we leave the presence of someone and we feel lowly and insignificant. Somehow they make us feel like dirt, like we're nothing. They're just manipulative. Then you know you're dealing with yeast. That was an ego. Or something that altered the taste like the honey does. Superficial. But other times we know we come in contact with those who enrich us. We feel special. We feel empowered. And that's the type of sacrifice we want to connect with. So when you're called from within or without to make a sacrifice, whatever sacrifice it might be in life, we have to stop and ask ourselves, feel our heart. Am I becoming more myself through this offering? Of course, if I'm sacrificing for my children's sake, if I'm sacrificing for my family, for my loved ones, then I know it's improving me, it's improving the world. Or am I sacrificing for something that's just going to keep pushing me in the wrong direction? Ask myself that question. And if I'm struggling to answer that question properly, I have to take a deeper look. I have to be more careful. And if I'm demanding sacrifice from others, we have to ask, especially if it's our loved ones, will this allow my children to grow? Will it allow them to be in touch with their inner powers and their potentials? Will it drive fear and insecurity into them? Let me share with you a story that comes to mind. A story a chassid once gave the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, a silver tobacco snuff box. He used to use them back in the day. The Alter Rebbe, he wasn't a tobacco sniffer, so he took off the lid of the box and he used it as a mirror. Now, why was the Alter Rebbe using a mirror for? He wanted to make sure that his tefillin, we wear tefillin in the morning when we pray. He wanted to make sure that tefillin is properly straight on his head. It's supposed to be right here in the middle. So he wanted the top of the box, which was silver, so it had a reflection, and maybe there was a mirror inside it. So he wanted to use it to make sure that tefillin was always properly straight. Once, somebody repeated this incident in front of his grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek. And he said, the Rebbe broke off the lid to use it as a mirror. And his grandson said, my grandfather was incapable of breaking anything. He did not break the lid. Rather, there was probably a wire connecting the lid to the box. And all my Zay did was remove the wire so that the two entities were not separated, and was able to use that cover as his mirror. What do you think? The point. Why is his grandson, what was he trying to express by saying that? Let's try to appreciate the story. What's the big deal if he broke off the lid from the box? So he broke it off. He wasn't breaking it out of rage, of anger. He was breaking it to use it for tefillin. Why was his grandson so sensitive? And why did he have to protest and say, no, my Zayda would never break anything? What difference does it make? Whether he broke it off or he gently removed it. And our Rebbe explained this. And he said that the Alter Rebbe, who was the ultimate embodiment of Judaism, was the leader of his generation. There was never a notion of breaking, of destroying, of shattering, of crushing something. If the mitzvah of putting on tefillin is causing you to break something, even if it's a silver tobacco box that he had no usage for because he didn't snuff tobacco, then something's wrong. Sometimes you have to remove the thread. Sometimes, yes, you have to separate it and repurpose it. But never do you have to break something, even for a good purpose. There are very few moments in life where we have to really, destroy something for, obviously, negativity needs to be destroyed and eliminated. But generally in life, we actualize, we enhance. So he really wanted to articulate the point that it wasn't about destruction. It wasn't about breaking the box if he was repurposing it for a different reason. And that's why, according to the Maharal of Prague, why all chametz was forbidden on those sacrifices, and why we could apply this to Pesach coming. Why does God care if we have a slice of pizza on Pesach? What's the big deal? Pizza is delicious, my favorite food in town. What's wrong? Pizza's delicious. Can't have a bagel with lox. What's so wrong with chametz? And the Maharal of Prague explains something fascinating. He says the difference between a slave and a free person is that the slave can never live life according to their own true nature and essence. The slave is always defined by another person dictating their behavior, their lifestyle. A free person is able to do what they want, where they want, when they want, how they want. They're able to express their truest, deepest self. And that is the difference between chametz and matzah. The natural state of bread is flour and water. Yeast alters the state, the taste of the bread. It interferes, it turns into something which it's not naturally. Not gesundheit, eat your bread. Nothing wrong. You want the carbs, load them up. But in this description, the Maharal was saying is the difference between freedom and slavery. When the Jews embarked on freedom, when our ancestors were finally emancipated from their back-breaking labor of Egypt, God was teaching them an eternal lesson of what true freedom means, which we, you and me, each one of us has to apply in our lives today. Freedom does not mean that I could just do whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want, with whomever I want, wherever I want. That's superficial freedom. And that might drive us into misery. If I feel that I have to do whatever I want, wherever I want, it could destroy me. True freedom means that my life and every aspect of it is an expression of my truest, most authentic inner self. That I'm not enslaved to my addictions, to my bad habits, to my superficial appetites, which the honey, so to say, symbolizes, to my fears, to my insecurities, to peer pressure, even guilt, envy, pettiness, whatever it might be. My truest, deepest core is what I want to be true to, is what I want to allow to soar, to give myself the opportunity to maximize who I am. And you're in an unhealthy relationship when you feel that's compromised. And that's not the kind of sacrifice we want to make. To be free, you have to recognize how deeply your soul is yearning to reunite with its inner core, to be able to express itself, to be who you want to be, who you really want to be. So I think this idea is so important for so many people. Whatever steps we need to take to make real sacrifices in our relationship with God. When you're making a sacrifice for God, we have to make sure that we're not abnegating our own selves, our own personality. We're not becoming someone who we're not. You ever heard of the Jerusalem syndrome? People who all of a sudden become fanatically religious. Even within Judaism, you need to have that moderation. You need to have that balance between body and soul. So Rosh Hashanah, when we celebrate the new year, it's the 7th month. It's not the beginning of the year. It's the physical year. We're celebrating the creation of Adam and Eve. We're celebrating the physicality, the corporeal aspects of life. But Rosh Chodesh Nisan, today, the 2nd day of the month, it's another type of Rosh Hashanah. It's the beginning of the months of the year. And now we celebrate the spirit. We celebrate our spiritual selves. It's a month of freedom that we're entering now. So this is a time when we have to eliminate our ego. The physical thrives on that ego aspect. So don't bring in the yeast to the honey. Don't alienate ourselves. Don't all of a sudden become someone who we're not. Mix in flavors and tastes and inflate. Don't be a stranger to yourself. We have to remain true and loyal to ourselves. We have to challenge ourselves deeply. But we have to make sure it's real, it's authentic, it's internalized. Please God, tomorrow, if we don't have the interference of load shedding, I hope to give you a shir. We spoke about the Korban Pesach 2 weeks ago. We'll continue in this theme of sacrifices, of Korban. I want to share with you something fascinating about a particular story that happened in Israel a number of years ago. A conflict between the government and the rabbis. Very interesting story about remaining true to yourself. So don't miss it tomorrow, 10 to 11. I hope to share with you a really fascinating story that's worthwhile for us to know. And this, of course, is the message of the chametz, or not in any way changing the taste, that we have to be true to ourselves. Salt, the Torah tells us, brings out the flavor that's already there. And salt preserves. So salt is so important to us that we want to preserve our authentic, true self. And God is not asking you to be untrue to yourself. When a person all of a sudden becomes fanatic in one way or another, you know something's no good. Again, to quote my mother's expression, alt metatzi toginish. Any extreme is no good, whether it's extremely religious or extremely not religious. Everything has to be in moderation, including moderation. So yes, sometimes we have to make difficult and painful decisions in life. We have to make those sacrifices for the sake of truth. And we discover that we need to make whatever changes it might be in our life to be more true to ourselves, to be more true to God. But God is not going to ask you to not be true to yourself. And sometimes we have to take a deep look in ourselves and ask if what we think we are sacrificing is really our truth or not. So the point and the message to each of us is, how are we going to be most true to ourselves? And this, I'll conclude, we have a couple of minutes remaining today, is the Talmud quotes one of the great sages, Mar Ukva. And he has a very interesting saying that the Gemara says. Let me just find the expression here and read it to you. Mar Ukva said, I am, in comparison to my father, what vinegar is in comparison to wine. When my father would eat meat, he would wait a full 24 hours until he ate cheese. But when I eat meat, I eat cheese during the following meal, which, according to the Gemara, was 6 hours later. And the obvious question is, if Mar Ukva held his father's behavior in such great high esteem, right? That he's praising his father here, saying, I am in comparison to my father what vinegar is in comparison to wine. His father is so great. So my question is, why didn't he change his behavior and follow his father's customs? His father waited a full 24 hours from meat to milk to cheese. Why didn't he turn himself into wine as he's describing his father? Why didn't he do the same? Why didn't he emulate his father's ways? The Gemara tells us that perhaps Mar Ukva was very aware of the truth that his father was on a totally different spiritual level than he was. Waiting a full 24 hours after eating meat before he would eat cheese would, in some mystical way, maybe enrich his father's soul. Maybe there was some reason for it. Yet for him, the son, to engage in that same behavior, that would just be an empty act of copycat, of mimicking his father's behavior. It would be like drinking vinegar because it comes from wine. For his soul, in and of itself, this would be a meaningless experience. What difference does, according to Jewish law, after eating meat, you only have to wait 6 hours. Hence, Mar Ukva only had to follow that. And perhaps if he was from Holland, he would only have to wait 1 hour, because that's the Dutch Jewish custom. The point is, every human being has to know who we really are. We have to discover the light of God within ourselves, within our own individual journey and personality. We have to remember we're indispensable to God's plan in this world. And so each one of us has our purpose, our mission, and we have to be true to ourselves. And that's salt. Salt brings out, it opens the taste buds. It helps us bring out the real true flavor. Unlike the honey, which alters the flavor. Unlike the yeast, which just artificially, superficially expands, which symbolizes the ego. So remember now, with Pesach upon us, we want to eliminate the ego, the aspect of those parts of life that are interfering with our real true selves. That's our calling. Vayikra is about calling. Vokare. What's your calling in life? Ask yourself that question. Only you can truly answer that question yourself. But remember to be true to yourself, because that's what the korban, the sacrifice required. Yes, we sacrifice to cultivate our relationship with God, but God wants you to be true to yourself. And so the sacrifice is only with salt, no yeast, no honey, no inflated ego, and no artificial superficiality. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen? Come on, guys. Okay, you know what? I think what we're going to do then is, I thought I would talk a little bit about the concept of gebrochts, but I think I'm going to get carried away. So maybe, if you want, we could talk a little bit about gebrochts, or we could call it here. And tomorrow, please God, remember, I intend to talk about the Korban Pesach, the story of the Paschal, the Korban Pesach, in those days and in these days, and to really get into understanding its significance today. Okay, any questions? No, okay.
Oh, Rabbi.
Yes, Leo.
It's quite, I don't know what to say about it, because I know I'm never going to be able to achieve everything that you are recommending. So it kind of makes one downhearted. Anyway, Rabbi,
Leo,
yes.
you have a good point, and in each of us is the same thing. It's only for 8 days that we're not allowed to have the chametz. So what I would recommend, I would say, is as follows. During Pesach, we work on, so to say, eliminating our ego for Pesach. We're going to eat the matzah. After Pesach, once we worked on the process of humility, and not to confuse ego with a healthy self-esteem. Healthy self-esteem you need even on Pesach. Ego is the difference. Ego stands for easing God out, right? But after Pesach, what happens is we go back to chametz, right? Because hopefully over Pesach we worked on understanding what a healthy ego is. So right after Pesach, we get back into the chametz. After we work on ourselves, Pesach is about a journey. It's about breaking free from slavery. Now that I learned to Pesach, to start off with the counting of the Omer, to work on my personal refinement, and to identify my true self, just flour and water, my true core, which we have to remember. What's my true core? It's a part of God. Every one of us has an neshama, the pintaliyid inside ourselves, that core essence, which is an actual piece of God, as described in Tanya. Then we need to celebrate our identity. We have to cherish our personality. We have to appreciate our talents. We have to know and recognize who we are. Maybe that's a little bit of ego, a little bit of pride. It's not destructive, but it can actually be a great tool to fulfill our purpose in life. First, we have to go to our essence. And that's why on Pesach, no chametz. Pesach, no chametz. Pesach, we want to be total humility. But after Pesach, after we work on ourselves, after we refined ourselves, then we go back into the chametz. Then we could go into appreciating and recognizing that ego also has its place in our lives. You accept that, Leo?
Oh yes, I certainly accept it. My only problem is achieving it.
That's why when we come into this world, the act of birth is called labor. I'm not here to, God forbid, in any way underestimate and underappreciate the hard work that the lady folk do in bringing children into this world. That is hard work too, and we should appreciate it. But labor is our entire purpose in this world. Our journey in life is filled with hard work and labor. We have to work on ourselves. And certainly, if you want to talk about ego and pride, we could certainly use that to be proud of our identity, to be proud of who we are as Jewish people. Let's be very proud of ourselves. So remember that chametz is forbidden. Not only on Pesach, we have to know that the elements of ego, whether it's the easing God out aspect or an ego that will hurt another, destructive ego is never good. But after Pesach, we remember that we need our pride. And the truth is now, you still have a week and a half that you can enjoy your chametz, so you can enjoy your pride, but remember, healthy pride. We're working on humility now, so we need healthy pride. We need to be proud of ourselves, proud of our family, proud of our community. We have to know what's healthy ego, what's not healthy ego. So Pesach is an opportunity to learn about that.
Thanks, Rabbi. Very
Pleasure.
inspiring.
Any other questions before we call it a day? Don't call it a day. Take the messages and lessons we learned and discussed and go apply them in the rest of your day, because our Parsha this week, Vayikra, is filled with lots of lessons and messages. It talks even about the sacrifice that was offered as a sin offering. If we committed a sin, and it's only natural, it's inevitable as human beings that we make mistakes throughout our day, and the Torah gives us an opportunity to make up for those mistakes, even intentional mistakes. So the Parsha is filled with it, whether it's the guilt offering or the sin offering, it's all in the Parsha. God recognizes our humanity, that we sometimes intentionally make mistakes. I mean, that sounds like an oxymoron, no? An intentional mistake, but it happens. But the korban, the sacrifices, that we should realize how to make up for it, how to fix up those situations. And that, thank God, we all have the opportunity. If we hurt somebody, to apologize. If it's between us and God, to do teshuvah. If it's between us and ourselves, don't forget yourself too. Do something to treat yourself out. Don't beat yourself up all the time. We need to sacrifice for our own well-being. Okay. Go, ladies and gents. Have a wonderful day. Get yourself some ice cream. Spoil yourself a little bit too. It's Rosh Hashanah. Technically, it's the beginning of the months of the year. New astrological sign. Take good care of yourself and take good care of others. The bull is only next month. Taurus. We're not in Taurus yet. Taurus, you see, during Sphira, you see, we start off with the care for others. When we left Egypt, it was Aries. It was about the sheep herd mentality, caring for others. To leave Egypt, we all had to be together. Then during Sphira, we're going to spend time refining ourselves. That's why the only full astrological sign in the entire Sphira is the bull, because it's about the self. It needs a lot of work. But now go take care of yourself by taking care of another. Zakazant, everyone. Great learning with you. It's 11 o'clock. And have a wonderful day. Please, God will continue tomorrow. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.